Hello, BookTube. It's almost time for a venerable BookTube tradition. 4 years old. That's an eternity in YouTube language. I'm talking about Victober, an event for the month of October in which we celebrate all things Victorian. I am on record on this channel and in print ad nauseum as claiming that the Victorian era is the greatest outpouring of human creativity in the history of the species, in every genre and in every discipline, from architecture to lyric poetry. I think it puts to shame the Quattrocento, and I think it puts to shame Pericles and Athens, the other two usual claimants to the throne. So I'm happy to participate. I love Victober. It is hosted by Katie at Books and Things, Ange at Beyond the Pages, Kate Howe, and Lucy the Reader, and they're going whole hog. They have a Goodreads group that you should go and join for discussions and updates and whatnot. They're doing a group read-along of two plays by Oscar Wilde, which is interesting in its own right. And they have all contributed challenges for Victober that will help you to assemble your TBR. Although, as they point out in their introduction videos, this is as loose gets. This is only enthusiasm. It is if you read a Victorian work of any kind in the month of October, you're doing just fine. The challenges are for people who want to dig in a little deeper, and there are 5 of them. And I want to go through them and sort of construct a TBR of my own. And the first one is Ange's challenge. And her challenge is to read a female Victorian author. And you get bonus points if it's a book that's new to you. And I figure, since the overwhelming majority of people who wrote during the Victorian era were women, and since the overwhelming percentage of the books they wrote were better than those by their male counterparts, I don't really think there's any point in me being the 150,000th channel to talk about our mutual friend or Elizabeth Gaskell or whatever. So instead of picking just one Victorian female author, I'm going to pick all of my TBR choices will be women. And the one that I'm picking for this one is a bit tricky because it's Constance James, a woman who tread very deliberately into the realms of mathematics and logical thought that were the realms of men, and came from nothing to do it, worked her way up to do it, and ended up by being, when she was older, a purely magnificent person. And the book that I automatically think of when I think of Constance James is A New Law of Thought and its logical bearing, which unfortunately doesn't work because A New Law of Thought came out in 1911, which puts it too late for the Victorian era. So I'm going to get to claim a bonus point here because I'm going to read a book I've never read before. I'm going to read Constance James's book from 1890, Elements of Logic, which actually did really well and served to sort of put her on the reading map, and which will be new to me in a number of different ways. I mean, I've never read it by this author. I've read A New Law of Thought, but I've never read Elements of Logic or any of her other logic and thinking and mathematical oriented books. And so it's new to me in that way. It's also new to me in that I don't know much about formal logic. I know that I love her as a prose stylist. So that will be my pick for Ange's challenge, is Constance James. Then for Kate's challenge, there is reread a Victorian book. And this is easy for me. I'm sort of leaning in this direction anyway. So I'm going to pick a book that I've read a couple of times. It's a long thing. The authors just kept adding to it and extending it over the course of an entire decade. And it is Lives of the Queens of England by Agnes and Elizabeth Strickland, who started in 1840 and just kept going for 10 years. And it was a hit in bookstores. It was popular and satirized, including very famously in one famous Victorian novel. Unfairly, I think. I don't think it strays far from fact, and it's a delight to read. And I am going to give it another try. I'm going to read it again. God knows how many English royal biographies I have read in between when I read this book last time and when I will read it now. So who knows what I will think, how that will have shifted. I love that sort of reading experience. And the Agnes and Elizabeth Strickland were... All of these women deserve biographies of their own. No one more than Constance James, but still, they deserve more study than they have, but that's okay. I'm pretty sure that Lives of the Queens of England is available on Project Gutenberg. I'm fairly certain of that. I'm fairly certain that a lot of these authors are. But if not Project Gutenberg, then we live in an age of boundless wonder when it comes to older works. Almost all of them have been scanned. Almost all of them can be accessed for free electronically in ways that their authors would never in a million years have dreamt. I'm going to do Lives of the Queens of England here. And another thing that I should probably point out here is that all of my choices are nonfiction. Because just as Victober is a venerable booktube tradition at 4 years old, there's also right around the corner from Victober, Nonfiction November, which is also a booktube tradition. Venerable. Then we move to Katie's challenge, and hers is to read either a book under 250 pages or a book over 500 pages. And I chose a book that's under 250 pages, and it's in the English Statesman series. It's from 1888. It was an old. These things are common. There are versions of them today. There was a series of books, potted little biographies, called the English Statesman series, and this one is by Alice Stopford Green, who did the English Statesman volume in 1888 on Henry II. And I have already read this book. I read it when I read Warren's gigantic biography, his definitive biography of Henry II, and loved it so much that I went on a minor Henry II binge in English and French and just read a ton of books. And that's when I read Alice Stopford Green's book, and I'm going to read it again for under 250 pages. I think it's 200 pages at most. But I remember enjoying it. I remember enjoying it quite a bit. And then Lucy's challenge is to read an underrated Victorian book that came out in the same year as your favorite Victorian book. Now, my favorite Victorian book is the greatest Victorian novel ever written, and one of the greatest novels ever written, and that is Middlemarch by George Eliot. And it came out in 1872. It started in 1871, but it became Middlemarch. It finished in 1872. So I'm picking a book from 1872, and it's one that I have never read. I've read bits and pieces, and I've read about it a bit, but I've never read the whole thing. It's Medical Women, a Thesis and a History by Sophia Jex Blake, who was a prolific author and a prolific activist, and was the first female physician in Scotland. In the Victorian era, only 1,100 years after the first male physician in Scotland. And she pioneered work, the women's medical education just throughout her whole life, and made a whole bunch of strides in that direction, and wrote all about it. What I wouldn't give for a collection of her letters. Oh my, oh my. But I'll take what I can get, and this book is her overview of the subject, and it really, you can feel in it the impatience, at least the sections that I read, you can feel the impatience. She was told over and over again, countless times in her life, that women do have an honored place in the medical profession as midwives, as nurses. And come, dear, you don't want anything more than that. You're not spitting on the accomplishments of your grandmothers and your great-grandmothers, are you? Why would you want to be a doctor? And you can feel a little bit of edged impatience with that in the sections that I've read. So I'm looking forward to reading the whole book. That will be a lot of fun. And then the final challenge for Victober 2019 is to read a book by candlelight. And Alex, at What Page Are You On, said that he already does that. It didn't surprise me at all. And Katie, in her video, said that maybe that wouldn't be a good idea to read a whole book by candlelight, but maybe a little bit, just to get the experience of how Victorians read their books. And I want to stress, reading by candlelight is extremely soothing for the eyes. When Katie or anybody else says, maybe you don't want to do too much of that, I think what they're thinking of is reading by inadequate candlelight, but reading by inadequate candlelight is just as much of a strain on the eyes as reading by inadequate electrical light. You put 6 candles on your nightstand and set them all. You will have plenty of light to read by, and it's a warmer light. It's a warmer, much more soothing light to the eye, I think. I read by candlelight quite a bit. I love it. And it will be no problem. In fact, to fulfill this challenge, I will read all of these books by candlelight in the little book room. Be my pleasure. I got a bunch of new candles just the other day at the grocery store. So I'm all set. So that is Victober 2019. If you're doing Victober, I'd love to hear what you're doing, who you're reading for Victober, and we'll be checking in throughout the month because this is October's, for our little corner of BookTube. This is October's big thing is Victober. This is our big calendar event for the month. And then there are a couple of big calendar events for November. One of which, of course, isn't technically BookTube, but I'm definitely holding you to it, and that is NaNoWriMo, where we all write a novel, where we write 50,000 words in 1 month. But another big event for BookTube in November is Nonfiction November. We'll be talking about that later on too. But anyway, that's Victober. That's my TBR. A whole bunch of really fascinating works, and I could go on. I could go on and on and on. But we only have these many prompts, and I think the idea for the limited number of challenges was just to encourage you all the more. And I do encourage you, not necessarily to go into the weeds and the byways the way I'm doing, but explore a Victorian author. It doesn't have to be nonfiction. You can read a novel. Explore them. They're incredible. Well worth your time, and you're never going to have better company to do it in than now. So I'm going to wrap this up, but I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.